All right, let's talk about something that, let's be honest, can sound like a total headache. Environmental compliance. You hear that phrase, and you probably think of endless paperwork and red tape, right? But what if I told you it's actually become this massive driver for innovation, and even a secret weapon in business strategy? Yeah, we're going to dive into how this whole world of rules is completely reshaping how companies plan for the future.
So this really gets to the heart of it. Is all this compliance stuff just a necessary cost, something you have to do? Or is it something more, a genuine catalyst for new ideas? And believe me, the answer to that question has changed a lot over the years. So our goal here is to take what seems like a super complex checklist and turn it into a clear, simple framework. We're going to start with the basics, the foundational rules. Then we'll get into the day-to-day grind, see how companies actually measure their progress, and finish up by looking at how this is all becoming a huge piece of their long-term strategy. Basically, we're going from the foundation all the way to the future. Okay, first things first, you gotta know the rules of the game. Before you can even think about managing compliance, you have to understand the absolute foundational pillars that everything, and I mean everything, is built on. These are the non-negotiables, the starting line. So here in the US, the big player is the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. They're the ones overseeing these landmark laws that you've definitely heard of. You've got the Clean Air Act, pretty straightforward. It's about what we're allowed to put into the air. Then there's the Clean Water Act, which, you guessed it, does the same thing for our water. Throw in some major rules about how we handle waste and protect endangered species, and boom, that's the bedrock of environmental law in America.
But of course, this isn't just a US thing. It's a global game now. Take the European Union, for instance. They have this massive regulation called REACH, and it's a perfect example of how granular and specific these rules can get. We're not talking about broad goals like clean air here. No, REACH gets down to the nitty-gritty, focusing on the risks of individual chemicals. So if you're a company operating worldwide, you're not just following one set of rules, you're navigating this incredibly complex global web of regulations.
Okay, so we've got the rules down. But knowing the rules is one thing. How in the world do companies actually manage all of this day to day? That's what we're getting into next. It's time to open up the operational playbook and see how these laws actually get put into practice.
The daily work of compliance is really this constant looping cycle. It all starts with permitting. You got to get that official green light just to operate. Then comes training, making sure every single employee knows what they're supposed to do. After that, it's auditing, where you're proactively hunting for problems before they happen. And finally, there's responding, where you're planning for the what-ifs, like spills or other incidents. It's this never-ending loop of doing, checking, and preparing.
Now, this is a really important distinction to make, so let's be super clear. An audit is not the same as an inspection. Think of it this way. An internal audit is you checking yourself. It's proactive. You're trying to find your own mistakes so you can fix them. A government inspection, that's someone else checking on you. It's reactive. It's mandatory. And their goal is just to verify that you're following the rules. One is about self-improvement, the other is about accountability.
So you might be wondering, how do you keep all of this organized? It's a lot of moving parts. Well, the answer for a ton of companies is something called an environmental management system, or an EMS. The best way to think about it is like the central operating system for all things compliance. And the big one, the gold standard, is ISO 14001. It gives you a formal, structured way to manage everything. The permits, the training, the audits, the whole shebang. And all of this naturally leads us to data. You've probably heard that old business mantra, right? If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Well, that is absolutely true for environmental impact. So let's take a look at how companies are using data to not just track, but actually drive their compliance efforts. One of the biggest metrics, of course, is the carbon footprint. We're talking about the total greenhouse gas emissions that a company is on the hook for. It wasn't that long ago that this was kind of a niche thing, something only the super green companies bothered with. Not anymore. Now it's a core requirement. Investors are demanding to see these numbers, and in a growing number of places, so are the regulators.
But it's not all about carbon, not by a long shot. Smart companies are tracking all sorts of key performance indicators, or KPIs. They're drilling down and asking really specific questions, like, hey, how much water are we actually using to make one of our products? Or is the amount of waste we're creating going down? What's our recycling rate really look like? Every single one of these numbers gives them a clearer picture of how efficient and sustainable they are.
So with all this data flying around, how do you make any sense of it? Well, use something like this, a dashboard. It gives you a quick, real-time snapshot of what's going on. A manager can glance at this and immediately see, okay, great, our emissions are trending down. But then they'd also spot, uh-oh, we've got 2 open findings from that last audit we need to deal with. It tells them exactly where to focus. And that's the magic, right? That's how a bunch of numbers becomes actual, actionable intelligence.
Okay, this brings us to our final and maybe most important piece of the puzzle. This is where it all comes together. We're going to see how compliance is making this incredible shift from being just an obligation, something you have to do, into a real strategic opportunity.
The companies that are really ahead of the curve, they're not just checking boxes. They're going way beyond the bare minimum. They're actively choosing to build greener buildings. They're digging into their supply chains to ensure they're sustainable. They're pouring money into renewable energy. See, these aren't just moves to follow the rules. They're smart, strategic decisions that help them attract the best employees, win loyal customers, and honestly, just make their business tougher and more resilient for whatever the future holds.
And look, making that kind of leap, it doesn't just happen. It takes real leadership from the very top. This quote just nails it. When you have effective governance, when the bosses are truly on board, compliance stops being this thing that just costs money. Instead, it becomes the blueprint, the actual framework for creating real sustainable value for the long haul.
So as we've seen, this whole journey has been a massive evolution, right? It started out as purely defensive. You just did what you had to do to avoid getting fined. But now it's a central piece of corporate strategy. It's how you talk to your investors, how you connect with your customers, and how you engage with your entire community.
And that really leaves us with one final big question to think about. When you look at your own organization, or even just the companies you follow, are they playing defense, just doing the minimum to avoid risk? Or are they on offense, actively using compliance as a tool to build a smarter, more valuable, and more sustainable business for the future? Because the answer to that question, well, it tells you pretty much everything you need to know about where they're headed.